There is a 4-meter exotic constrictor lying in the dirt beside the northern floodplains, and its head has been torn clean off. It is the middle of winter, and the site has left a field crew of hardened wildlife biologists standing in absolute silence over the carcass. For 6 long years, these researchers from the Regional Conservation Trust had been radio tracking this individual snake. A massive male they called Loki, an animal whose survival was central to understanding how foreign predators are dismantling this country's most vulnerable waterways. But when they traced his telemetry signal into a quiet patch of paperbark scrub on a freezing morning, they found his body half buried under a mound of dry eucalyptus litter and debris. The head and neck were completely chewed away, deliberately hidden, as if something had tried to cache the kill for later. Whatever dragged down this monster was entirely unimpressed by an animal capable of swallowing native wallabies and full-grown wetland predators whole. That single decapitated carcass was the first solid proof of a brutal, unseen war playing out across our wilderness. To understand why this kill stopped researchers in their tracks, you have to realize the sheer scale of the crisis. For more than 25 years, across the entire recorded history of this alien invasion, nothing native had ever been recorded killing a fully grown giant constrictor. These reptiles entered our borders without a single evolutionary counterweight. They arrived from the tropical river systems and dense grasslands of Southeast Asia, easily reaching lengths of over 5 meters and weighing more than 90 kilos. In the late 20th century, they flooded into the domestic exotic trade. As hatchlings, they are harmless ribbons no thicker than a pencil, sold to private keepers who never anticipate what that pencil becomes. Within a few short years, that novelty pet turns into a 4-meter apex predator, consuming vast quantities of fresh meat and outgrowing any enclosure a hobbyist could maintain. Overwhelmed owners routinely did the unthinkable. They drove past the edge of town, out toward the coastal marshes and river channels, and tipped them out. Then came the flashpoint. A catastrophic Category 5 cyclone hammered the tropical coastline, tearing through coastal infrastructure, tearing the roofs off commercial breeding facilities and captive wildlife holdings. When the enclosures shattered, scores of breeding-age snakes vanished straight into the expansive billabongs and tidal wetlands. It was an ecological nightmare no biosecurity agency could contain. The landscape was a paradise for them. The endless waterways and thick reed beds offered infinite ambush cover, while local prey species had spent millennia evolving without ever encountering a constrictor of this caliber. Our native fauna had no instinct to run, no defensive strategy, and no evolutionary memory of the scent. With no native predators large enough to threaten a mature adult, the invaders did what unchecked apex predators always do. They bred relentlessly, embedding themselves into the heart of our wild country. Today, wildlife authorities estimate there are tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, of these giant constrictors scattered across the remote floodplains and dense mangroves of the north. But here is the cold reality that keeps land management rangers awake at night. Field biologists believe that less than 1% of the total population is ever detected or culled by human efforts. For every 4-meter serpent pulled from the edge of a dirt track, roughly 99 more remain coiled and visible in the speargrass and waterlogged sedges, perfectly camouflaged and untouchable. The numbers we can count are nothing more than a statistical rounding error against the vast, hidden majority. What this silent army of reptiles did to the surrounding ecosystem represents one of the most abrupt ecological collapses ever documented on the continent. The definitive data came from an exhaustive wildlife survey that laid bare the sheer speed of the devastation. Over several seasons, teams of environmental scientists drove nearly 57,000 kilometers of remote bush tracks after dark, conducting spotlight surveys the exact same way rangers had done for decades. In the core areas where the invasive snakes had established absolute dominance, the findings were staggering. Sightings of common brush-tail possums had plunged by more than 98%. Native bandicoots and patamelons had suffered an identical catastrophic crash of over 99%. Quoll sightings had plummeted by nearly 88%. Meanwhile, Small ground-dwelling mammals, native marsh rats, and local bandicoots were not just suffering steep declines. Across entire catchments, they were simply gone, completely undetected. An entire functional tier of the native food web, evolved over millions of years of continental isolation, was systematically hollowed out in barely a decade. For years, skeptics within rural committees argued that a single introduced pest could not possibly cause such sweeping devastation on its own. They blamed changing fire regimes, altered grazing pressures, or shifting weather patterns. To settle the argument once and for all, field ecologists designed an uncompromising experiment. They fitted dozens of native bush rats and small marsupials with VHF tracking collars and released them directly into snake-dense country to document the exact mechanism of mortality. The data came back brutal and unequivocal. Within 11 months, foreign constrictors were directly responsible for 77% of all recorded deaths. Within a year, the tracked population had been completely annihilated. The invaders were not merely riding a wave of regional environmental decline. They were the absolute engine driving it. These animals are engineered for consumption without an upper ceiling. A constrictor's skull is not a rigid box of bone. The two halves of its lower jaw are connected only by an elastic ligament at the chin, allowing the mouth to stretch far wider than the snake's actual skull, while mobile ribs flex to allow massive prey items to slide uninterrupted into the gut. In late 2022, the very team monitoring Loki captured unprecedented photographic evidence of an invasive python in the act of swallowing a full-grown agile wallaby whole, a native mammal that actually outweighed the reptile consuming it. Even freshwater crocodiles, the apex river predators everyone assumed were safe at the top of the food chain, have been discovered dead inside the stomachs of large constrictors. The confirmed dietary ledger for these invaders now exceeds 85 distinct native species, spanning everything from vulnerable ground birds to large marsupials. As the lead ecologist put it, it is far easier to compile a list of what these snakes cannot swallow than to track everything they do. If there is one thing this country has learned the hard way through decades of ecological heartbreak, it is that you cannot simply import a quick fix. Modern environmental managers know the catastrophic history of biological controls all too well. Decades ago, introducing foreign predators to eradicate agricultural pests resulted in an enduring disaster, where the imported animals completely bypassed the target and decimated native frogs, small marsupials, and ground birds instead. There is no cavalry to call from overseas. There is no miracle predator you can drop into our northern river systems to hunt out giant constrictors without triggering an even deadlier cascade of extinction. Whatever was going to hold the line against these reptiles had to already belong to this soil. For more than 25 years, it seemed nothing in the landscape was capable of standing up to them. Left with zero outside options, wildlife authorities and conservation researchers turned to a tactic born of sheer operational necessity. If they could not outhunt the invader across thousands of square kilometers of impenetrable paperbark swamps and tidal flats, they would force the invaders to betray their own kind. They initiated a high-stakes Judas program. The strategy relies on cold, calculated biological leverage. During the crisp, dry winter months, the peak of the annual breeding season, receptive adult females emit potent chemical pheromones that travel across watercourses and dense scrub. Male constrictors possess an almost supernatural ability to track these invisible scent trails through hundreds of hectares of dense wilderness. Biosecurity teams and field veterinary surgeons began capturing massive, dominant males directly from the wild. Under sterile field conditions, surgeons make an incision along the snake's lower third, carefully sliding a sealed VHF radio transmitter and temperature sensor into the body cavity before suturing the scales shut. Once fully recovered, the snake is released back into the exact grid coordinates where it was caught. The handlers then step back, switch on their directional antennas, and let the reptile do the impossible work of bush reconnaissance. The tracked male leads the team straight into the hidden mating aggregations deep inside root systems, limestone caverns, and hollow logs where human eyes could never reach. And the females are the true high-value targets. A single mature female constrictor can deposit up to 100 viable eggs in a single nest. By tracking the scout snake and intercepting that female before her clutch is laid, rangers eliminate an entire generation of apex predators in a single afternoon. In the field, these tracked males are known as scout snakes, or Judas snakes, named for the ultimate betrayal. Loki was the undisputed king of the program. A massive 4-meter, 24-kilogram male, he had spent 6 uninterrupted years out in the field, systematically surrendering female after female to the cull teams. He was healthy, formidable, and seemingly invulnerable. So when his steady VHF signal led researchers into a dense pocket of coastal scrub on that bitter winter morning, the team anticipated finding another monster female coiled beneath the fallen branches. What they found instead shattered every assumption they had ever made about the food chain. The site where Loki lay was not a typical kill zone. The snake's headless, muscular carcass had been intentionally covered with a thick mound of fallen eucalyptus bark, dry leaves, and scrub litter. That single behavioral signature changed everything for the tracking team. In our bush, opportunistic scavengers, crows, wedge-tailed eagles, or feral pigs, tear into a carcass where it drops, scattering remains across the dirt until nothing is left. Only a very specific kind of predator kills substantial prey and then methodically conceals the leftovers beneath forest debris, intending to return under cover of darkness to finish feeding. That deliberate behavior is known as food caching. In this region of the country, caching pointed directly toward predatory mammals, which immediately narrowed the suspect list down to 2 distinct contenders. The first theoretical possibility was a large feral predator, like an oversized wild dog or dingo hybrid. A mature wild dog certainly possesses the bite force and raw mass required to pin and overpower a large constrictor. But wild dogs typically hunt in packs, ripping their meals apart communally and leaving ragged, dispersed mess across a wide perimeter rather than a tidy, concealed cache. The second suspect was something far smaller, something native. The spotted-tailed quoll, our mainland's largest surviving carnivorous marsupial. On paper, the idea of a native quoll taking down a 4-meter constrictor was complete madness. An exceptionally large adult male quoll tops out at around 3 to 4 kilograms. Loki weighed 24 kilograms, more than 6 times the mass of the largest quoll in the territory. How does a compact, tree-climbing marsupial the size of a domestic cat decapitate a heavy-bodied tropical constrictor that routinely crushes and swallows native wallabies? The biologists refused to rely on guesswork or speculation. They treated the scene like a forensic investigation, contacting wildlife carnivore specialists, setting up motion-activated infrared trail cameras, focused squarely on the cached kill, and retreating from the site to wait within 24 hours, the sensor tripped. When the researchers retrieved the memory card and scrubbed through the high-definition night footage, they were stunned by what moved across the screen. Slinking out from the dense tea tree thicket, moving with total calculation and predatory poise, was a solitary, fully grown, native quoll. Not a pack of wild dogs, and not an introduced feral beast. A single, 4-kilogram native carnivore, walking calmly back to reclaim a 24-kilogram kill it had brought down with surgical precision. On the footage, you can watch the quoll methodically inspect the surrounding scrub, testing the air for lingering human scent, patrolling the perimeter of the mound, and then confidently digging into the concealed carcass to continue feeding. It was an extraordinary, defiant image. An ancient native marsupial casually devouring the very invader that had spent decades erasing its ecosystem. The homeside had finally landed a devastating blow. But the burning question remained. How did an animal giving up 20 kilograms of muscle and raw crushing power manage to turn the tables on an apex reptilian giant? The mechanics of how this kill unfolded come down to a fundamental vulnerability the giant constrictor could never escape: core body temperature. Pythons are ectothermic, entirely reliant on ambient heat to generate metabolic energy. Every single movement, how swiftly they strike, how fiercely they constrict, and how rapidly their nervous system responds, is dictated by outside temperatures. In the 48 hours leading up to Loki's death, an unseasonal southern cold front had pushed across the northern floodplains, bringing sharp overnight frosts and dropping ambient temperatures to near freezing. For a tropical reptile evolved for equatorial humidity, that kind of sudden thermal drop is physically immobilizing. The metabolism slows to a crawl, the powerful muscular coils turn rigid, and the animal drifts into a forced physiological shutdown. Loki had compounded the danger through his own reproductive instincts. Roaming through open country at the height of the winter breeding season, he was caught far from the thermal shelter of deep hollow logs or rock crevices when the freeze arrived. The quoll never had to face a 4-meter constrictor at full operational power. It encountered an apex predator locked in slow motion, entirely unable to strike or coil with lethal speed. Moving with ruthless efficiency, the marsupial exploited the thermal window, delivering a crushing bite to the base of the skull that severed the spinal column instantly. For the first time on record, a native predator had turned the winter chill into a lethal tactical advantage. What elevates this kill beyond a single lucky encounter is the grim history between these two species. Exotic constrictors do not merely outcompete quolls, they hunt them directly. In earlier necropsies performed by wildlife pathology labs, scientists examining culled pythons discovered undigested quoll claws lodged within their stomachs. The invaders hit native marsupials from two fronts, by preying on them directly and by relentlessly stripping the landscape of the small mammals and ground birds they need to survive. The scene in the scrub was a profound inversion of that ecological trauma. A native species driven to the brink by an invasive juggernaut had turned the tables, transforming the hunted into the hunter. Loki's death is not an isolated event. Across the northern catchments, scientists are documenting the earliest signs of natural resistance. Estuarine crocodiles are ambushing mature constrictors in open river channels. Wedge-tailed eagles and black-necked storks are snatching juveniles from exposed sandbanks, and lace monitors are excavating hidden nests to devour clutches of eggs. This is raw, unscripted ecological adaptation in real time, an ancient landscape slowly finding the seams in the invader's armor, learning that even the most formidable foreign predator has moments of absolute vulnerability. Yet, we have to look at this landscape with clear eyes, because the Australian bush has no room for sentimentality or easy fairy tales. One decapitated constrictor does not reverse a multi-decade ecological invasion. There are still tens of thousands of these foreign giants entrenched across our northern wetlands, and the vast majority will never be spotted by a ranger, let alone intercepted by a hunting quoll. For the foreseeable future, the frontline defense of this continent remains firmly in human hands. The dedicated biosecurity contractors working the riverbanks after dark, the targeted culling programs, and the surgical Judas tracking operations that find and neutralize massive breeding females before their clutches can hatch. The sheer biological math of up to 100 eggs per nest every single season means that human intervention is still the only force capable of matching the invasion's raw numbers. Nevertheless, that trail camera footage from the paperbark scrub carries an enduring significance that resonates far beyond a single data point. Seeing a 4-kilogram native marsupial stand victoriously over a 24-kilogram apex invader proves that our native wildlife is far more resilient and adaptable than defeatists ever assumed. Millions of years of evolution, in one of the harshest, most unforgiving landscapes on Earth, have forged animals with extraordinary grit and opportunistic intelligence. The balance of power in our wilderness is not set in stone. It is constantly contested, tested by fire, drought, and frost, and renegotiated with every changing season. The ancient food web is not giving up the fight. It is steadily observing, adjusting, and learning how to strike back against an enemy that once seemed untouchable. Out where the bitumen ends and the real country begins, the land remembers its own rules. Nature in this part of the world has weathered catastrophic disruptions before, and beneath the surface, the slow machinery of evolutionary adaptation is already grinding forward. Every so often, on a freezing winter morning beside an isolated floodplain, the home team claims an unmistakable victory. If you want to continue exploring the untold ecological battles, the relentless pest wars, and the extraordinary stories of survival hidden across our wildest landscapes, consider subscribing to the channel. There are many more dispatches from the front lines of the bush on the way, and the next discovery is even more remarkable than this one.